Merry Christmas and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the 2011 series Zombies Christmas Carol from Marvel Comics. You may have guessed I was going to do this when I mentioned that it existed in a previous Marvel Zombies video, and if so, well done, detective. It makes sense, I feel. I mean, I've covered basically every other Marvel Zombies comic between the last 2 years, so why not the Christmas one? Of course, that's also a bit of a misnomer, because you'll notice they dropped the Marvel part of the title, and that's for good reason. Marvel Zombies in pretty much every incarnation was about Marvel superheroes and supervillains being turned into zombies, or at the very least, about them fighting zombies. This comic doesn't feature a single Marvel character. Instead, what we have here is a direct adaptation of Charles Dickens' classic story, A Christmas Carol, with the twist of finding a way to bring in hordes of hungry zombies. It's essentially Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which had come out only a couple years earlier, but for Charles Dickens. Because certainly every classic tale can be made better by adding zombies. Or Muppets. Or zombie Muppets? Might be onto something there. Or not. So let's see if I can avoid making constant Muppets Christmas Carol references as we bite into this classic and take this away. Death had lost its grip to begin with, is the twist on the classic opening line of the original story that we get here. The original line is that Marley was dead to begin with, but as we see upon entering the halls of this hospital for the poor, death doesn't have quite the same meaning in a world where the dead are rising as zombies. And this hospital is already overrun, and Beaker and Honeydew here, going by the names of Mr. Sands and Mr. Jeffers, are attempting to keep these masses at bay. They lock the hospital gates and run to what they say is their only hope for salvation, one Ebenezer Scrooge. What a fantastic introduction for our main character. The art for this series is truly spectacular, and having something like this at the very beginning just immediately dissuades the notion that this is going to be half measures done as part of a quick cash grab. They're actually taking this ridiculous concept seriously. And, you know, good on them. Scrooge is busy rejecting his nephew Fred's invitation to Christmas, as he always does. But notably, he gets especially worked up at the mention of naming his sister, Fred's mother, even though no one actually names her. It seems this Scrooge may wear his heart a bit more on his sleeve as to how he became such a grumpy old Gus. When Jeffers and Sands arrive, they ask for Scrooge's help in containing the undead, though they don't use that term. They explain to Scrooge that the hungry dead have grown to such numbers that they cannot be contained, that even the poorhouses and prisons are overrun, and that the still living would rather hide or die than seek shelter in such places now. To which Scrooge then delivers his famous line about how it would be better if they did die and decrease the surplus population. This prompts Jeffers to reply that the undead are the surplus population, which will be the name given to them for the rest of the series. Jeffers insists Marley played some role in creating the surplus population, but Scrooge doesn't like that one bit, yelling them out of his office as he insists that Marley really was dead to begin with, and so couldn't play a part in that like they said. Later that night, Bob Cratchit, Scrooge's woefully underpaid clerk, asked to leave early to look for his son Tiny Tim, fearing for the boy's safety with the dead now roaming the streets. And he's not the only one worried about that, as we see as Scrooge makes his way home that night. The streets are deserted and businesses are all closing up and boarding up the windows. When Scrooge gets home, he sees Marley's face on his door knocker, and then inside the dark building, he sees a hearse barreling down the stairs at him. Frightened by all these apparitions, Scrooge double bolts himself into his bedchambers, but despite that, is immediately visited by the ghost of Jacob Marley, looking very zombie-like himself. Marley is there to warn Scrooge that there no longer is any death, as the zombie disease has spread far and wide, largely thanks to action Scrooge and Marley took during their lifetimes. It bothers me kind of probably a weird amount that this is the second time it's been mentioned that Marley had some responsibility towards spreading the disease, but the comic never really clarifies what he did to become responsible. I suppose the indication is that he and Scrooge gathered up so much wealth and took so little care of the poor that it created the situation where the poor were so amassed that the disease spread so much easier than it would have otherwise. Weird to put that all on just two rich dudes and not all rich dudes and governments and systems and etc., but I guess we can't do anything about those things, and we can do something about Scrooge, so okay. Cause that is why Marley is there, to ensure that Scrooge has a change of heart. So Marley warns Scrooge that he'll be visited by 3 ghosts, with the first one to appear when the bell tolls 1. Before leaving, he also gives Scrooge a vision of the nightmare that the town has become, as it is overrun by the undead in the fog that surrounds them. The first ghost does come at 1, the ghost of Christmas Past, appearing as a zombie-like woman in a bridal gown. She takes Scrooge to his own past, and here we get an almost subtle but neat little trick. While the entire series is adapted by one writer, Jim McCann, the various timelines are done by different art teams, with one team handling the present and another team handling both the past and future, in order to create an immediate distinction between the time periods for the reader. Again, that's attention to detail I was not expecting from this comic. Christmas Past leads Scrooge to the schoolhouse he went to as a young man, and there we see the origins of the plague, as much as we see of it anyway, as a dying horse that young Scrooge worries over suddenly bites him, leaving his arm in a ghastly rotting state. Scrooge's sister then joins him there to bring him home, and the two look on as the horse decays before their eyes. The ghost moves us right along to Fran as she dies in childbirth. And though Scrooge dearly loved his sister when he was younger, he is not there for the birth. But the ghost makes the point that some say the light that kept Fran living passed on to her son, Fred, that day. You might almost think that's an important point, especially since this scene was not in the original book. Next we move to another previous Christmas, to one of old Fezziwig's grand Christmas parties he would always throw, regardless of the cost. Scrooge and an old friend of his, Dick Wilkins, worked for Fezziwig at this time, and we get a moment that's not in the book but does seem to be in all the adaptations, of this younger Scrooge complaining about the expenditures of the party, and he gets so worked up that he accidentally slices into Dick's arm with a fingernail. Dick then leaves the party, clearly already infected. This is the true start of the plague, and we'll see this leads to a later Christmas where the Fezziwigs become overrun by the undead. Still another Christmas brings us to Scrooge and his one love, Belle, who is currently breaking up with him because his heart has become cold and greedy. And not for her, but for money. Scrooge's one meager protest to her leaving leads to him cutting her arm the same as he did Dick's. From there we move to one last Christmas Past as we head to an asylum, where we see Belle being visited by a lover she had after Scrooge. But she is too far gone now and she hungers, and so feasts on the would-be suitor. Scrooge demands to be returned home and away from these horrible sights, so terrified that he pulls off the spirit's veil, only to reveal that the ghost of Christmas Past is the zombified Belle. Scrooge attempts to use a lamppost extinguisher, if we're going with what the book says, in order to dispel the spirit. And while she does leave, that only brings us to our next spirit, the ghost of Christmas Present. He's a raucous bacchus of a ghost, and he takes Scrooge around the world, showing him that where there would be celebrations of Christmas, there is, instead, only the hungry dead shambling about, spreading their disease. There are 2 notable stops on this trip, the first to the house of Bob Cratchit. Bob's family are waiting for him to return with Tiny Tim, still out I guess looking for him from when he left Scrooge's place. We also learn that they've already lost their daughter Martha to the surplus population. Bob returns home with Tiny Tim in his arms, and Tim is in a poor condition. He had quite bravely been singing in order to lure the undead away from a church and the people they might feast upon there, providing himself as a sacrifice. Bob saved Tim, but it seems his actions might not be enough, as the ghost of Christmas Present tells us that he sees a dark future of Tim's abandoned broken crutch unused at home, and a tiny Tim that can never die. The other notable stop is to Fred's house, where an already zombified woman cries out for help and seems to receive it as a light shines on her and she falls over, apparently human again. Fred opens the door to his house and quickly ushers her inside into safety, and the ghost of Christmas Present again repeats that the light of Scrooge's sister is in Fred. It's almost like they're building to something. At the end of the day, as the ghost of Christmas Present nears death, he reveals that inside of him he has been keeping two children. A boy who is ignorance and a girl who is want. This actually was in the original book, but they weren't described as such horrifying little zombie babies. You guys should know by now that I am a sucker for zombie babies, but I don't like these two. They're too freaky, especially when the ghost of Christmas Present dispels himself by letting these representations of the surplus population devour him whole. Icky. That just leaves us with the ghost of Christmas Future. Future, as he usually is simply depicted as death, with the only twist being a prominent bony jawline. Or really, a prominent bone jaw. Death, Christmas Future, takes Scrooge to his own house during a future Christmas, and we see who I believe to be Jefferson Sands as they tear down Scrooge's bed curtains to throw them, for some unclear reason, to the surplus population. We also go to Bob Cratchit's house to see him sitting alone by Tiny Tim's broken crutch, as Christmas Present had forewarned would happen. Tim's voice calls out through the barricaded door to his father, but not because he's alive. He bursts through the door as a zombie, followed by the rest of Bob's family, all zombified as well. And they proceed to have their Christmas feast on the poor old patriarch. The ghost then leads Scrooge across the town to find that everyone has now fallen victim to the plague, leaving only the surplus population in the town. These zombies all move as one up to a graveyard to a single grave in that graveyard, where a figure is rising through the earth. And though he doesn't want to see it, Scrooge is brought close enough to see that the figure rising is Scrooge himself, now also a zombie. Horrified, Scrooge begs the spirit for it to be possible to change this ghastly future, but the ghost does not respond. In desperation, Scrooge pulls at the spirit's robes and reveals something that we're never shown, but the indication seems to be that Scrooge himself becomes the ghost of Christmas Future. They are depicted with the same jawline, which would be why seeing the jawline was so important. Scrooge awakens to Christmas morning, both elated to still be alive and that he hasn't missed Christmas, and terrified at what he, as a single person, could do to stop the zombie plague. He seems to form a plan and heads out into the town ready to seize the day. He first finds Jefferson Sands and informs them of their role in the plan. Next, he heads to the Cratchit house, where he takes Tiny Tim and leads the whole family to Fred's house. There, the love and light inside of Fred, especially when embraced by Scrooge, cures Tiny Tim of his infection. And well, every other problem he appeared to have. Fred, Tim, and Scrooge then lead a happy parade through the streets, gathering up the undead to follow behind them. All of the undead, as Jefferson Sands had gone about releasing them all. The three men lead the undead to the same cemetery as before, but this time they gather around Fran's grave. With a declaration that they will hunger no more, the light shines upon them all, and all are cured of the hungry death. Belle is also there, somehow, and is also cured of her infection, but she quickly ages and dies before Scrooge. Despite that, Scrooge becomes a jovial, changed man, and helps bury those who suffered the same fate before throwing a lavish Christmas party at his own home. But the experience all proves to be the end of Scrooge, and as he leaves his estate to Bob Cratchit, Scrooge becomes the first to die now that death is once again possible. And that brings us to the breakdown. I could probably complain about how so drastically rewriting the plot of the story caused fitting in some of the classic lines to the dialogue feel extra contrived, or how the use of the different art teams could lead to confusion over when a character was supposed to be the same as a character in the present, but honestly, why bother? This comic definitely exceeded my expectations. It was a fun and interesting twist on the classic, and McCann clearly put a lot of thought into how this was going to work. And the art team seemed to recognize that effort and meet it with their own hard work. This is a story that probably shouldn't exist, and on existing probably shouldn't work. But it does, and it does. And you know what? Good on it. So I'm giving this series a recommendation level of high. If you enjoy any version of A Christmas Carol, this is a more than worthy addition to those vaunted volumes. The collected edition gets 1 holly wreath. And I'm saying that's a very good thing. It contains an in-depth breakdown of each issue and the development of this version of the characters and story by both the writer and artist, and that includes behind-the-scenes sketchwork. It also includes a cover gallery, and the general presentation of the collection is pretty nice. Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I don't think I'll usually be doing a Christmas video, but this one just seemed to make sense for this year. I should be back with Robin Son of Batman before the year ends, and then on to some X-Men, hopefully. So if you did enjoy this video, or you're looking forward to that stuff, or you just want to spread some cheer to all around you, then be sure to click the like and subscribe and all those things so you can help me have a Merry Christmas, and so you can help yourself. Be sure to be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here, in the Comic Cave.